Our next speaker is joining from the Netherlands, Mr. Jonathan Clark. He is a scientist by background, and he will give a personal story, I think, or a personal perspective. So thank you very much for joining.
The idea.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, let me share my slides. Can you see those?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, first of all, before I start, I wanted to thank the organisers for the invitation to speak today. In particular, Peter Kaptein and Gogana, who has helped a lot. It's a real honour to be able to speak. I don't know how often the patient view gets heard, but this is the first time for me, and I'm absolutely delighted. What I want to do, I'm going to introduce myself really and start with by saying that I really shouldn't be alive. If I was born just a couple of years earlier or even a year earlier, if I didn't live here in the Netherlands, if I'd lived, say, in the UK where I was born, I would be dead by now. The fact that I'm still here, not just here, but healthy and enjoying life is really down to the researchers, the scientists, people that perhaps I hope are listening to this, or at least will watch the recording. And so it's a very personal story. And I've got a couple of messages right at the end. This is it very briefly. I was diagnosed with mantle lymphoma 2014. The bit to remember from this slide, I was strong and very fit. I was a rugby referee at quite a high level at the time of diagnosis. I was also a huge foodie, loved restaurants, loved life, and I was married with 2 children. And I'll come back to see what has happened to me, but still alive. I was going to use a metaphor to take us through this, and it's very ancient. I hope people will recognize snakes and ladders. It's actually a very ancient Indian game from Hindu times, back in the 2nd century AD, and it represented the path to enlightenment through the steps. And kind of interestingly, of course, the ladders help you on your way and the snakes take you backwards. And I thought it was a rather nice metaphor for how you live with the ups and downs of cancer. Interestingly, the original game back then in the ancient times had more snakes than ladders. There was a kind of moral aspect to it. Beware, to the children, the Hindu children, beware, life has more snakes in it than it does ladders. Just having introduced myself, I'd like to introduce my disease. Many of you there will probably know mantle cell lymphoma. In most of the articles that are written about it, it starts with this inspiring phrase, it has a dismal prognosis, and it really is. Most of you working in the field, or even if you're not, you know that it's one of those tricky lymphomas that's mostly non-Hodgkin, but has Hodgkin pieces to it to make it very difficult to treat. Even if the treatment is successful, it almost always relapses, or it always relapses. So it's not a great thing to be told that you have. Which brings me really, and this is, you'll see a series of slides with some snakes, some ladders, depends on what it is. The diagnosis, interestingly, why it's not a complete snake, was that it started, I had a lump on my shoulder, I had an ultrasound, I kind of guessed it was cancer. And at that stage, well, you know, my doctor at the time wouldn't say anything. So I went to Dr. Google, and Dr. Google said, it's either metastatic cancer from something else, and that's not good, or it could be a lymphoma, and most lymphomas are treatable. So I felt that at least if I got a diagnosis of lymphoma, that thing in the year. And that was the case, so that's the ladder. But then, of course, the snake was, it's a particular sort of lymphoma, it's mantle cell. And this kind of good news, bad news is really, I found all the way through since 2014, that's how my life has been. I had the standard treatment back then, this is 2014, which and autologous stem cell treatment. Again, maybe interesting for some people to think that that it's a question of snakes and ladders. The very, very first dose of chemotherapy I had, I had enormous cell death, and those swollen lymph nodes just disappeared, almost disappeared overnight. And that gave me such a kick, the idea that, okay, it's poison, it's not good, but wow, it's having an effect is surprisingly uplifting. These things are relative, of course. It's not what you choose to do of a day, but it does really help. And then, of course, there's the downsides. I actually found the stem cell treatment to be even tougher than chemotherapy. I got some infections, and it was tough. But I did recover. Lots of side effects along the way. Again, what I want to kind of characterize is this: everything has these two aspects. Side effects, yes, they're unpleasant. It's working. Something's happening inside your body. And those two angles I found quite important for myself. I was always, you introduced me as a scientist. I haven't been a scientist for many years, but scientific curiosity, and I wanted to know why the side effect was happening, what was causing it, which of the cocktail of drugs was the one that was causing it. And it somehow helped me to know that the good story. I was in remission. Everything was fine. I recovered. Scans look good. No evidence of disease. I was hoping that I could look forward to perhaps 8 to 10. That's the median, I think. Maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 years of reasonably good life, and then we'll see. And I was sort of hoping that scientists, people in the audience, would have figured it out by then, and who knows. So this was a good time. 2015, I was feeling pretty good. And then, of course, I knew it would relapse. It came back in 2 years, which was a bit quicker than I would have wished for. And those of you, any of you with knowledge of mantle cell lymphoma knows, or actually any lymphoma that relapses, it often comes back very aggressively. Mine did. I was very ill very quickly. I was lucky. Ibrutinib had just been, so this is a story of luck. I mean, I said I was amazing to be alive. It's also a story of luck. Ibrutinib had just been approved for use in Europe and in the Netherlands. Acela-ibrutinib, not yet, but ibrutinib had, and that, at least for the beginning, pushed the disease back. In the end, it didn't work with me, but it gave me a good quality of life for a period. So another reason to be thankful for the scientists on that, and for the fast track for the submission procedure. But I was ill. I had a very high level of disease, too much to have another stem cell transplant. This was a dark time. Those of you who looked carefully on the second slide when I introduced myself would see that in 2014 I was married with 2 children, and now I just have 2 children because my wife sadly passed away. So while I was ill, she got a very aggressive cancer and died. And at one stage, we didn't think either of us would make it. So what do you tell 2 children? Okay, they're 20, 21 years old, but losing one parent is bad. Losing 2 is a disaster. So this was a very deep time in my life. And along came the trial. So I started, because I had taken ibrutinib, and actually a friend, a colleague, was on a trial for acela-ibrutinib. I started to be in. His wife works for NIH. So this is how it goes, I think, with patients. We gather together in little mini groups of patients, and some of us know someone who knows someone. And she said, well, you want to have acela-ibrutinib if you can. Shall I look up a clinical trial? And so this whole idea of clinical trials, the clinicaltrials.gov, the EU site came up, and I started to dig into it. And I also, of course, looked at mantle cell lymphoma and discovered there was a trial. So I asked the doctor. At the same time the doctor had identified me, I was lucky. The trial had just opened in Amsterdam. And I'm not able to tell you which trial it is, but if you're smart, you can look it up. It opened just in Amsterdam. They put me forward. Why this is a story of ladders and snakes is that this was not a straightforward process. the first talk. Between then and about a month, the trial closed because there'd been some unfortunate deaths in the States where the trial had come from. So the trial was suddenly closed, and suddenly my options were back to, well, wait until the ibrutinib runs out and then salvage chemotherapy, which was basically my only option. Then suddenly the trial was open again. I was in, but then I had some blood work done and I was out. And this in-out went on actually until 2 minutes before I was due to have the central line placed in to receive the CAR T cells back. I had a blood test the night before. My bilirubin was too high, and I was out of the trial right just at the moment I was going to receive my cells back. And then the news came through just a few minutes before that it was okay. It was a stress result, and in fact, the bilirubin was fine. But that up and down, in, out, exclusion, exclusion, I don't know if that, I don't have enough experience of other clinical trials, thankfully. But that for me was a real story of snakes and ladders. And when every snake leads down all the way to the bottom, because what did I have to look forward to? Salvage chemotherapy. It means that every decision becomes a very serious one. There were side effects. I caught the end of Dr. Srusha's Lenz's presentation. She mentioned cytokine release syndrome. That's a side effect unlike anything I came across before. It put me into intensive care. It gave me a very scary neurotoxic effect that was, even I find it difficult to remember, let alone describe. I can't express my respect for the doctors that cared for me and the nurses. I think this is the challenging aspect of CAR T cell therapy, at least from my perspective. And the people in Amsterdam managed admirably, but I can imagine every case is different, and knowing when to administer the steroids to dampen down the cytokine release syndrome, knowing that if you do it too early, you might leave some cancer cells. I cannot imagine how people do their jobs. I have immense respect for the doctors. And then that's why I'm sitting here. It's just over 9th of August 2018 was the treatment. I've just passed my 2 years, complete metabolic remission. It's astounding every time I go and have a scan, every time the blood work is done. Yeah, there are still some things here. My B cells, I have no B cells, so I need monthly immunoglobulin injections. But if you consider the alternative, this is trivial. I'm alive. I'm back. I'm strong. I'm running again, and life could not be better. It's hard, and that's really truly why I was so honoured and pleased to be able to speak today. Because I don't know who's on the call, but I hope many of you, some of you, are involved in trials like this, and this is why you do it. So that's sort of my story, rather quickly, but I didn't want to dwell on too many details. What I did want to talk about a little was sort of my observations. Again, I'm not a medical scientist. I haven't been a scientist for 25 years, but I do retain that kind of curiosity, and I do like to look at. I've been involved a lot in innovation. Where can we make improvements? And from my perspective as a patient, and really my first observation is about the quality of life. And maybe this is due to the clinical trial, but I actually remember it also from my stem cell treatment. There's a great focus, of course, on the body, on treatment, on the body reaction. And I find there's perhaps only afterwards do people think about the quality of life aspects, and they're easily forgotten, and also they're forgotten by the patient too. I mean, you know, I in the struggle to stay alive, you sort of forget what kind of life it might be, and you don't really pause to think. And I certainly didn't, and I think I probably should have done more. And also, what can you do during the treatment to improve the quality of life? And I have kind of two aspects. It's difficult for me to describe this, but there was one statement. I gave an interview a few months ago, and this is what I said. Remember, I was an athlete. I was fit. I was a rugby referee. I was strong. I was fit. I lost a lot of weight during the treatment, even more so than the stem cell transplant. And I lost muscle. And people said that I should be happy to be alive. And of course I was. But I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the person that I used to be. I was this gaunt, thin, emaciated person. I was alive, but what kind of life was this? And I know that sounds ungrateful. I know it sounds bad, but that's the kind of thing that goes on in your head. And to come back from that is probably the biggest struggle, weirdly. Two elements I'd like to pick out of that. One is food and the other is fitness. I mentioned at the start also, if you read the slide, I'm a big foodie. I love to eat in good restaurants. And of course, these whole treatments, chemotherapy, these all the drugs you take, they alter your sense of taste, they make you nauseous, they change your perception of food. And so it's very difficult. But food, I find in most of the, at least in my experience, food translates in hospitals to nutrition. And nutrition is what's in, what's out, have you got enough? I don't know if any of you have been unlucky enough to taste some of the nutritional supplements out there, but obviously they're hard to make, but they really don't taste good. And food is one of those strange things, at least in me, and I think in other patients I spoke to as well. It's a mood lifter. You give me a good plate of food, I feel better. And yet, in the hospital I was in, and I'm afraid as this is many hospitals around the world, food is not the main piece. It's keeping the patient nutritionally balanced, fine, but taste or appearance, I think it's undervalued and underrepresented. And I would love to see people take that, because it helps with this quality of life aspect. It helps with the optimism in yourself and makes you feel good. The first thing I did when I came home was to cook myself an omelette. I couldn't really taste it very well, but just the fact of doing it. So why can't we have little kitchens in cancer units that, or bring someone in to help patients learn how to cook nutritionally? All sorts of ideas I have, and I just feel this is an area that's waiting to be discovered. It's partly, it's not just about the nutrition, but it's about the mood lifting effects of food. And of course it's hard. I know it is, but it is something that I'd like to see more focus on. And the second one is fitness. It's so easy, especially when you've had a snake, you slid down a snake, you're at rock bottom. It's so easy just to lie there and kind of despair or not do something. The effort to get out of bed, to sit at a table when every muscle aches, or to even try and trudge around to walk is high. And I think, again, this is something that fortunately I do see some signs here, and there was in Amsterdam. I'm going to tell you an anecdote in a moment to reflect on this. But I think that the things I did, I was very stubborn. I remember in my stem cell transplant, I was really determined if I had food, I would eat it at the table and not in my bed. Even though whatever, that's what I did. For lunch and dinner, I'd at least sit at my table and not in bed. It requires sort of stubbornness, and I think that is also an undervalued part of the story. The anecdote I'd like to share is, so I was in the hematology unit in the hospital in Amsterdam, and there was a young physiotherapist student, very full of passion, full of new ideas. And she'd seen a couple of the more stubborn guys trudging, doing like back and forth along the corridor with our intravenous pole. We did sometimes circuits of the nurses' station, just trudging along, trying to get some activity going. And she'd seen this, and we didn't know, unbeknown to us, she found this image and printed it on stickers. And there's one for 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters, which is the circle around the nursing station, around all of the ward. And she stuck them up one night. And I just thought, what a brilliant, brilliant small act, but that meant something very big. And that's, I think, also what I'd like to that's sort of the message really that I have, is when you're talking about quality of life, often those small interventions can have a massive effect on a patient. She used to get us up doing physiotherapy. It didn't matter if we were in wheelchairs, whether if we could just trudge to her place, she would get us doing some form of physiotherapy. And it was tiny, it was insignificant, and yet it wasn't. It was huge. And I think that that is what I'd like to leave here. And lastly, what's become my mantra, I've been given a second life, thanks to people on this call, people who were involved in the clinical trials, the doctors and nurses at the hospital in Amsterdam, the hospitals in the US, the pharma company that's developed the treatment, the clinical trial regulators who've approved it. All of those people, all of you, the people listening in, hopefully, to this, all of you helped give me a second life. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. And all I can do is promise that I'm going to make the most of it and share with you some words that have really helped me back. And it's never too late to be what you might have been. So I'd like to thank you. I've got time for questions. I ripped through that quite quickly. I don't know how many people are on the call, but I'm happy to answer questions. And I'm also talking tomorrow in a bit more detail about the clinical trials and the in-out inclusion exclusion, if people are interested in that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for this amazing story you share with us. And thank you very much also for joining tomorrow when more people like me who are dealing with clinical trials. First, believe me, we experienced a lot of troubles even in the standard clinical trials, not only with inclusion and exclusion criteria, but with logistical issues, shortages of supplies, investigational products. And I can understand how it is difficult for patients to manage. Because Dr. Schulz-Lenz is still with us, do you have a question to the head of the regulatory body in Europe dealing with CAR-T and other advanced therapies? So we can give you another message. We still have time, and I would like to seize the opportunity being with us, and she stayed with us. Or maybe she has a question to you.
From my side,
go ahead, please.
Yes, Jonathan Clark. I think that this was a really a big story, and I've been I'm a clinician. I've worked on the hemato-oncology unit during my clinical time, and I think the way you've described all of this was fascinating. And well, yes, I mean, it is so that the CAR T cells are a new treatment modality, and they offer new treatment options, and it is so good to see that this has worked on your side. And I guess you've been treated with a product that we have currently under evaluation in our committee. So that's all I could say. Thank you very much for your contribution.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I can't mention it because of that. That's the reason I couldn't mention the trial or the drug. And yeah, I do think so. Actually, tomorrow, one of the things I'll say is around communication. There is quite a lot of patient communication, patient-patient communication, and some of it is in full. I happen to be lucky. I have a friend who's, as I said, whose wife is an expert at NIH and has access to the databases there. And I was hooked into the CLL Society in the States. And of course, I have my kind of scientific, what's the word? Skepticism is sort of still with me. But I do think an awful lot happens between patients. Since achievement, I've been connected with a number of patients, and we do talk a lot. And I just wonder whether that's something that can't be stimulated. It's stimulated from some of the charities, but I wonder also from a European perspective whether there's not more that can be done. I mean, I made a promise to myself lying in bed in Amsterdam recovering, saying that if I come through this, I want to tell this story as much as I can. I want to help. I mean, that's part of the trial, right? I'm doing it partly to save myself, but also in the knowledge that if it works, others may be helped too in the future. And that's exciting and inspiring. But it also means it's up to me to share, right? And I'd love some platforms, more platforms to be able to do that. The fact I'm here is sort of happenstance. So I just wonder whether there's something there, whether there's something that can help patient-to-patient communication, and then probably moderated so that it's, you're not telling me about the latest fruit that grows in the Amazon down a track that will cure everyone. I've heard enough of those, but something really, really well moderated.
Yeah. Well, on the European Medicines Agency level, we have a whole department that is dealing with patients, but in the form of patient organizations. So they meet again on the 19th of October. Patient organization together with it's called patient. It's the patients working group, and we have a healthcare physicians working group, and we have patient representation there, also in the Committee for Advanced Therapies. So the European Medicines Agency is very active there. And have you ever looked at the homepage, excuse me, of the European Medicines Agency in terms of the patient related to patient organizations? That is certainly one point to connect with, and if you like, and I can give you a contact point there, that would be one option for your engagement.
Yeah, no, I did. I remember, I think back, because I wanted to know if accelabrutinib was going to be approved or was coming, and I think I found someone on the committee of the agency, and I I emailed them. Yeah, you'll do anything when your life's at stake. You'll do anything. So, but I didn't look at that. No, please do. That would be great.
Yeah.
Did you catch my email address?
No, but I guess that the organizers maybe.
Yeah, we can take care. Yeah, we can take care.
And then I will help. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. It was on my slides, but they seem to have disappeared.
No, with your permission, we will share with Dr. Woodlands your email.
Yeah, please do. No, please do. And as I said, anything I can do to help. I think there's, I really do feel that's part of the whole package, right? You have a trial. Your life is saved, and I want to give back as much as I possibly can, and I feel quite strongly. So, for instance, I'm on the food and nutrition panel at the hospital in Amsterdam, because I complained so much about the food. They said, well, we'll put on the patients, the patient working group on that. But I'm happy to help, really.
And thank you very much for the kind words you said about the doctors and nurses who are taking care of you, because often people forget once they get better, they get discharged, and you take it for granted. But I started my career as in the ICU. I know what is a cytokine storm and IRDS, all we are talking about amid COVID. So
when I
when
had my neurotoxic event, all I could say was, I don't feel right. That was all I could say. I have no idea how do you assess a patient that all I could say is something's not right. I'm not feeling myself. What can you? It's remarkable. No, I have huge respect. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. It's really very emotional, your story, because at the end of the day, you were cured, and the technology is still not labeled. I mean, it's still under review. So you had the chance to get enrolled in such a trial with all these issues you went through. But really, thank you very much for sharing your story.